The grand hall of the Ashford estate was filled with hundreds of wolves from across North America, all gathered to witness the annual summit of alphas. But Cale Ashford barely noticed any of them. He stood at the head of the massive oak table that had been in his family for 6 generations, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room with the cold efficiency of a predator assessing potential threats. At 35, he was the youngest supreme alpha in the continent's history, ruling over the largest territory with an iron fist that never wavered, never showed mercy, and certainly never showed weakness. His dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face, the hard line of his jaw, the cruel curve of his mouth that rarely smiled. He was power incarnate, and everyone in that room knew it. What they didn't know, what he made absolutely certain they would never know, was that somewhere in this very building, invisible and ignored, was his fated mate. The one person in the entire world created specifically for him by the moon goddess herself. The one person he had spent 9 years pretending didn't exist. Her name was Lyra Moonstone, and she was an Omega. That single fact had been enough to make Cale reject everything the mate bond represented the moment he'd first caught her scent, 9 years ago at a territory border negotiation. She'd been there as a translator, her gift for languages making her useful despite her lowly status. And the moment their eyes had met, Cale had felt the bond snap into place with such force it had nearly brought him to his knees. But he hadn't fallen. He'd stood perfectly still, let ice flood his veins where fire wanted to burn, and made a decision that would haunt them both. He would acknowledge her as his mate in title only, give her a place in his household to satisfy the basic requirements of pack law, but he would never touch her, never complete the bond, never give her the power that came with being a supreme, Alpha's true companion. Because Omegas were weak. His father had taught him that lesson with fists and fury throughout his entire childhood. Omegas were manipulative creatures who used their heat cycles and sweet scents to trap powerful alphas, drain them of their strength, make them soft. His own mother had been an Omega, and his father had blamed every one of his failures on her supposed influence, beat that lesson into Cale until it was carved into his very bones. So when fate gave him an Omega mate, Cale had simply refused to accept it. The ceremony was reaching its conclusion, various alphas pledging their continued alliance to his rule, when Cale noticed a disturbance near the back of the hall. Several wolves were clustered around something on the floor, their voices rising in concern. He felt irritation flash through him at the disruption, was about to send his beta Marcus to handle it, when a scent reached him, honeysuckle and moonlight, the scent that haunted his dreams, no matter how hard he tried to suppress it. But this time, it was wrong, tainted with the copper smell of blood and something else, something that made his wolf suddenly surge forward in his mind with a howl of pure anguish. Before he consciously decided to move, Cale was crossing the hall, shoving wolves aside with enough force to send them stumbling, until he reached the center of the crowd and saw her. Lyra was on the ground, her small body crumpled like a broken doll, her skin so pale it was almost translucent. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and even from several feet away, Cale could see the way her hands trembled, the way blood trickled from her nose. She wore the simple gray dress that all Omegas in his territory were required to wear, a symbol of their place in the hierarchy he'd reinforced throughout his rule. And seeing her like this, seeing how fragile she looked, something cracked in the ice around his heart. But he couldn't afford to show it. Not here, not in front of hundreds of alphas who would see any concern for an Omega as weakness. So he kept his face perfectly blank as he gestured to Marcus. "Take her to the healing wing," he said, his voice cold and commanding, giving nothing away. "Make sure the healers see to her immediately." Then he turned and walked back to his place at the head of the table, as if nothing significant had happened at all, as if his mate wasn't dying on his floor, as if his wolf wasn't screaming at him to go to her, protect her, save her. The meeting continued, but Cale heard none of it. His mind was stuck on the image of Lyra on that floor, on the wrongness of her scent, on the way she'd looked like she was fading away. It wasn't until hours later, after the last alpha had left and he was alone in his private study with Marcus, that he finally allowed himself to ask, "What did the healers say?" Marcus's expression was grim, and Kale felt dread coil in his stomach even before his beta spoke. "She's dying, Alpha," the head healer says. "It's the incomplete bond. 9 years of being connected to you, but never fully claimed, is literally killing her. Her body is consuming itself, trying to bridge a gap you won't allow to be closed. She has maybe 6 months, probably less. The only ways to save her are to complete the bond or sever it entirely by taking another mate, which would kill her instantly, but at least end her suffering quickly. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more tales of supernatural romance and chance love, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Kale should do. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now let's continue with Lyra's heartbreaking journey. Kale sat in silence for a long time after Marcus left, staring at nothing, his mind racing. 6 months. Lyra had 6 months to live because of him, because of his prejudice, because he'd been too much of a coward to face his own damaged beliefs about what Omegas were. He'd told himself for 9 years that he was being strong, that he was protecting his position, his power, his legacy. But the truth was, he'd been weak. He'd let his father's poison infect him so deeply that he'd spent nearly a decade slowly murdering his own mate through neglect and rejection. The mate bond was sacred among wolves, the most precious gift the moon goddess could bestow, and he'd treated it like a curse, treated Lyra like she was nothing. He'd given her a room in the servants' wing, barely larger than a closet, never spoken to her except to give cold commands, never even looked at her directly if he could avoid it. And she'd endured it all with a quiet dignity that he'd mistaken for acceptance, never realizing she was dying by inches right in front of him. He found himself walking through the dark hallways of the estate, his feet carrying him without conscious direction, until he stood outside the healing wing. Through the partially open door he could see her, lying in one of the beds, looking impossibly small beneath the white sheets. A healer was checking her vital signs, shaking her head with clear concern. Kale stayed in the shadows, watching, and that's when he saw it. Lyra's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and there were silent tears running down her temples into her honey-blonde hair. But it wasn't sadness in her expression. It was resignation, acceptance, like she'd already made peace with dying, like she'd given up on him completely, if she'd ever had hope at all. Something in Kale's chest twisted violently at that realization. She wasn't fighting. She'd fought for 9 years, endured his cruelty, his rejection, his complete indifference. And now, she'd simply decided it was time to stop, time to let go. And the thought of her slipping away, of her dying without ever knowing what it felt like to be truly cherished by her mate, made him feel something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades: fear. The next morning, Kale made a decision. He would fix this. He would complete the bond, save Lyra's life, and then they would figure out the rest. It was practical, logical, the only reasonable solution. He didn't let himself think about the fact that he was terrified of what completing the bond might mean, of how it might change him, of whether she would even want him after everything he'd done. He simply gave orders for Lyra to be moved to the Luna's suite, the rooms that should have been hers, 9 years ago, and prepared to do what he should have done the day they met. But when Marcus went to fetch her, he returned with news that stopped Kale's heart. "She's gone, Alpha. Left sometime during the night. One of the kitchen Omegas saw her walking toward the forest border just before dawn. She took nothing with her. The healer says in her condition, alone in the wilderness, she won't last more than a few weeks." Kale's wolf exploded inside him with a rage and panic so intense it took every ounce of his control not to shift right there in his office and tear the room apart. She'd run. His mate had chosen to die alone in the woods rather than stay with him one more day, and he couldn't even blame her. What had he ever given her, except pain? Why would she believe anything would be different now? He'd conditioned her through 9 years of rejection to expect nothing from him but coldness. Of course she ran. It was the only way she could maintain any dignity, any control over her own fate. But Kale wasn't going to let her die alone. He couldn't. Whether it was guilt or something deeper he wasn't ready to name, he knew with absolute certainty that he had to find her, had to try to fix what he'd broken, even if it was too late, even if she hated him, even if completing the bond was the last thing she wanted. He owed her that much at least. The search began immediately. Cale led it himself, something that shocked his entire pack since he'd never shown the slightest personal interest in Lyra before. He tracked her scent through the dense forests that bordered his territory, followed the faint trail of her blood where she'd stumbled and fallen, felt his heart clench every time he found evidence of how much she was struggling. She was heading east, toward the unclaimed lands where rogues roamed freely, where a weak Omega alone wouldn't survive a single night. He pushed himself harder, ran faster, his wolf driving him forward with an urgency he'd never felt before. But Lyra had a head start, and she was moving with the desperate determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. It took him 3 days to finally catch up to her, 3 days during which he barely slept, barely ate, thought of nothing except finding her before it was too late. He found her at sunset on the 3rd day, collapsed beside a stream in a small clearing, her body so still he thought for one terrible moment that he was too late. But as he approached, shifted back to human form and knelt beside her, he saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. Barely. Her skin was burning with fever, her lips cracked and bleeding. And when he carefully turned her over, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment they just stared at each other, and Cale saw so many emotions flash through her golden eyes. Surprise, fear, pain, and then worst of all, resignation again. She didn't even seem shocked that he'd come after her. She just looked tired. "Please," she whispered, her voice so hoarse it hurt to hear. "Just let me go. Let me die with some dignity. Don't make me go back there. Don't make me spend whatever time I have left being invisible in your house, being a ghost you pretend not to see." Her words hit him like physical blows, each one driving home the full weight of what he'd done to her. He'd made her feel invisible, made her feel like existing in his presence was a punishment worse than death. And she was right. Going back to how things were would be cruel beyond measure. But that wasn't what he wanted. He didn't fully understand what he wanted yet. His emotions were too tangled, too complicated after 9 years of suppressing them. But he knew it wasn't that. "Lyra," he said, and it was the first time he'd spoken her name out loud in 9 years. His voice was rough, uncertain, nothing like his usual commanding tone. "I'm not taking you back to how things were. I'm taking you home to complete our bond, to try to save your life, to try to fix what I broke. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I've done. But please, let me try. Let me at least try to make this right." She laughed then, a broken sound that turned into a cough that racked her whole body. When it subsided, she looked at him with eyes that held too much pain, too much knowledge. "You don't want to complete the bond, Cale. You want to ease your guilt. You want to be able to tell yourself you tried, that you're not the monster who let his mate die through neglect. But I've spent 9 years living with your disgust, your contempt, feeling through our incomplete bond just how much you hate what I am. I felt it every single day. Every time you looked through me like I didn't exist, every time you flinched away if I came too close, every time you made another law restricting Omega rights in the territory. I felt your revulsion like poison in my veins. So no, I won't let you complete the bond out of obligation or guilt. I'd rather die free than live as your despised mate." Her words shattered something inside him, forced him to truly see himself through her eyes for the first time. And what he saw was monstrous. He'd been so convinced he was being strong, so certain his father was right about Omegas, that he'd never stopped to consider what his rejection was doing to Lyra on a daily basis. The bond worked both ways. If he could feel the pull toward her, that he'd spent years suppressing, then she could feel his rejection, his disgust, his determination to pretend she didn't exist, every single day for 9 years. How had she survived it? How had she not broken completely under that constant barrage of rejection from the one person in the world who was supposed to cherish her above all others. He looked at her lying there, so weak she could barely speak, and felt shame for the first time in his adult life. Real, crushing shame that made him want to claw his own chest open. "I was wrong," he said quietly, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. Everything I believed about Omegas, everything my father taught me, it was all poison and lies. I've spent 9 years being exactly the kind of alpha I swore I'd never become. Exactly like him, cruel and closed off and using my power to hurt those weaker than me. You deserved so much better. You deserved a mate who saw your strength, your kindness, your incredible ability to endure things that would have broken anyone else. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am begging you to let me try to save your life, not because of guilt, though I have plenty of that, but because the thought of you dying, of never having the chance to know who you really are, what we could have been if I hadn't been such a coward, it's unbearable. Please, Lyra, come back with me. Let me try." She closed her eyes, and he thought she was going to refuse again. But then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "If I agree to this, if I let you complete the bond to save my life, I need you to understand something. I won't live the way I have been. I won't be your secret shame, hidden away in the servants' quarters. I won't watch you make laws that oppress my kind while pretending to be your mate in name only. Either you claim me fully, publicly, as your equal, or you let me go right now. I'd rather have a few weeks of freedom than years of being your dirty secret. And if you do claim me, I will hold you accountable. I will push you to change the Omega laws, to reform the entire corrupt system you've built. I will be loud and inconvenient, and everything you've spent your whole life thinking an Omega shouldn't be. So if you're not ready for that, if you're not ready to face the consequences of truly accepting me, then walk away now." Kale looked at her, really looked at her, and saw beneath the weakness, beneath the physical deterioration, to the core of steel that had kept her going through 9 years of his cruelty. She wasn't asking for his pity. She was demanding respect, equality, a real partnership or nothing at all, and he realized that this was exactly what had terrified his father about Omegas. Not that they were weak, but that they were strong in ways alphas couldn't control. His mother must have been like this, must have challenged his father's beliefs, and rather than face his own inadequacies, his father had beaten her down, blamed her for his failures, and eventually killed her. Kale had always believed the official story that she died in a rogue attack, but looking at Lyra now, seeing her strength, he suddenly knew with absolute certainty that his father had murdered her, and then raised Kale to be just like him. The realization should have broken him, but instead, it crystallized something. He could either continue his father's legacy of cruelty and oppression, or he could choose a different path. Lyra was offering him that choice right now, in this clearing, with her life hanging in the balance. He could let her die and stay exactly the same, safe in his prejudices, unchallenged in his power, or he could accept her terms, complete the bond, and face the terrifying prospect of actually changing, of becoming someone worthy of the incredible woman fate had given him. When he looked at it that way, there was really no choice at all. "I accept your terms," he said firmly. "All of them. I will claim you publicly as my equal. I will work with you to reform the Omega laws, and I will spend, however long it takes proving that I've changed, that I see you, that I value you, not because you're my mate, but because of who you are. And if you never forgive me, if you decide once you're healthy that you want to leave, I'll let you go. But please let me try to save you first." Lyra studied his face for a long moment, and he let her see everything he usually kept hidden. The fear, the shame, the desperate hope that maybe it wasn't too late, that maybe they could salvage something from the wreckage he'd made of their bond. Finally, she gave a tiny nod. "Okay," she whispered. "Take me home. But remember, Kale, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because I'm not ready to die yet, because I have work to do, changes to make, and I can't do any of that if I'm dead. Don't mistake my survival instinct for forgiveness. You're going to have to earn that." He nodded, relief flooding through him so intensely it made him dizzy, and carefully gathered her into his arms. She was so light, so fragile, and he felt rage at himself all over again for letting it get this bad. But he pushed that aside and focused on getting her back to the estate, to the healers, to safety. The journey back took 2 days, because Lyra's condition was so poor they had to move slowly, stop frequently. Cale carried her the entire way, unwilling to let anyone else touch her, and they didn't speak much. But he could feel something shifting in the bond between them, like a door that had been locked for 9 years was starting to crack open. When they finally reached the estate, the entire pack was waiting. News had spread that their Supreme Alpha had personally gone after his rejected mate, had brought her back, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Cale ignored them all, carrying Lyra straight to the Luna's suite, laying her gently on the massive bed that should have been hers all along. The head healer rushed in immediately, began her examination, and after several tense minutes turned to Cale, with a grave expression. "She's very weak, Alpha. The bond needs to be completed soon, within the next few days, or it will be too late. Her body is starting to shut down. Once you complete the bond, her healing should accelerate dramatically. But until then, she's extremely fragile." Cale nodded, dismissed the healer, and turned back to Lyra. She was watching him with those golden eyes, and he could see the fear beneath her brave facade. This wasn't going to be a romantic claiming, a passionate connection between destined mates. This was going to be a desperate measure to save her life, clinical and necessary, and they both knew it. But they also both knew it had to happen. Lyra spoke first, her voice steadier than it had been. "I need a few days to prepare myself. This bond, once it's complete, it's permanent. I'll feel everything you feel. You'll feel everything I feel. And there will be no more hiding, no more pretending. Are you really ready for that? Are you ready to feel 9 years of pain and rejection flooding back at you through our connection? Because that's what's going to happen. The moment we complete this bond, you're going to experience everything I've felt, and it won't be pleasant." He sat down in the chair beside the bed, met her eyes steadily. "I know," he said quietly, "and I deserve every bit of it. I deserve to feel what I put you through. Maybe it's the only way I'll truly understand the depth of what I've done. So yes, I'm ready. Whenever you are. However you want to do this, I'm ready." She nodded slowly, then turned to look out the window at the moonlight streaming in. 3 days, she said. "Give me 3 days to regain some strength, to prepare myself mentally, and then we'll complete the bond. But Cale, I meant what I said. The moment this bond is complete, things change. I won't be silent anymore. I won't hide. You need to be ready for that. Ready for me to challenge you, to push you, to demand changes that your pack won't like. Because I'm done being invisible." The 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Lyra remained in the Luna's suite, regaining her strength slowly with the help of the healers and carefully prepared meals. Cale found himself spending hours just sitting with her, not talking much, but being present in a way he never had before. He started to notice things. The way she had a habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking. The way her eyes changed color slightly depending on her mood, going from honey gold to amber when she was angry or determined. The way she was kind to every servant who entered the room, thanking them genuinely, asking about their families. She had built an entire life in his territory that he'd never bothered to see. The Omegas loved her because she'd spent 9 years quietly helping them, using her own meager resources to make their lives slightly less difficult under his oppressive laws. She'd created an underground network of support for the most vulnerable pack members, all while dying from his rejection. The more he learned, the more ashamed he became, and the more desperate to be worthy of her. On the second day, Marcus came to him with troubling news. "There's unrest in the pack, Alpha. Many of the older Alphas are unhappy about your attention to the Omega. They're saying you're going soft, that completing the bond will weaken you. There's talk of challenging your position." Cale felt his wolf rise in fury at the thought of anyone questioning his authority, but he forced himself to think, instead of just react. This was exactly what Lyra had warned him about. The moment he showed her respect, the moment he deviated from the cruel alpha his father had been, there would be pushback. He could crush it with violence, assert his dominance the old way, but that would just prove he hadn't really changed. Or he could handle it differently. "Call a pack assembly," he told Marcus. "Tomorrow night. Everyone attends. It's time I addressed this properly." Marcus looked uncertain, but nodded and left to make the arrangements. That night, Kyle told Lyra about the unrest, about the assembly he'd called. She listened quietly, then said something that surprised him. "Good. Let them challenge you. Let them see that you're strong enough to change. To admit when you're wrong. Real strength isn't ruling through fear, Kyle. It's having the courage to be vulnerable, to grow, to put the welfare of your pack above your ego. Show them that." He stared at her, struck by the wisdom in her words, by how much she understood about leadership despite being denied any official power. His father would have called that weakness, would have said an alpha must never show vulnerability, never admit fault. But his father had been a tyrant, not a true leader. And look where that had gotten him. Dead in his prime, killed by his own beta in an uprising. Kale had been too young to prevent. Maybe it was time for a different kind of strength. The assembly hall was packed the next night. Every adult wolf in the territory was present, and the tension was thick enough to taste. Kale stood at the front, Lyra beside him in a simple but elegant dress, her hand in his. He could feel her trembling slightly, knew how much courage it took for her to stand here in front of everyone who'd watched her be humiliated for 9 years. But she held her head high. He addressed the pack, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I called you here, tonight to address the rumors, the concerns, the challenges to my authority. And you're right to question me. Not because I'm weak, but because I've been wrong. For 9 years I've enforced laws that oppress Omegas, treated them as lesser, denied them basic rights and dignity. I did this because my father taught me to fear Omega strength, to see their abilities as threats rather than gifts. And in doing so, I've failed you all as an alpha." A murmur ran through the crowd, shock at hearing their supreme alpha admit failure. Kale continued, his grip on Lyra's hand tightening. "This woman beside me is my fated mate. The moon goddess herself chose her for me, and I rejected that gift out of prejudice and cowardice. I rejected her publicly, relegated her to the servants' quarters, made her invisible. And she nearly died because of it. The incomplete bond was killing her, and I was too blind, too stubborn to see it. But she survived. She endured 9 years of my cruelty and still found the strength to help others, to build support networks for the most vulnerable in our pack, to be more of a leader in silence than I've been with all my power. So yes, I'm completing our bond. Yes, I'm claiming her as my equal. And yes, I'm going to work with her to reform every unjust law in this territory. If that makes you think I'm weak, then you're welcome to challenge me. But understand this, I'm not changing because she's making me soft. I'm changing because she's making me see what real strength looks like." The hall erupted in noise, arguments breaking out between those who supported the old ways and those who'd been waiting for change. Then an older alpha named Garrett stood up, his face twisted with contempt. "This is exactly what I feared," he said loudly. "The Omega has already infected you with her weakness. You speak of reform and equality as if Omegas deserve the same rights as alphas. But they don't. They're built to serve, to submit, to support from the shadows. Giving. Then power disrupts the natural order. Your father understood this. He kept Omegas in their place, and his pack was strong because of it." Kale felt rage surge through him at hearing his father's poison being repeated. But before he could respond, Lyra stepped forward. Her voice was clear and strong despite her lingering weakness. "You speak of natural order, Alpha Garrett, but what you call natural is just tradition built on fear. Yes, Omegas are different from Alphas. We have abilities you don't. We can heal, we can nurture, we can build communities and foster loyalty in ways that brute strength never could. And that terrifies you, Because if Omegas are given equal voice, equal power, then you can't pretend your violence and dominance are the only things that matter. Garrett's face went red with fury. How dare you speak to me that way, Omega? You have no rank, no authority. Lyra's smile was sharp. I have the authority of being your future Supreme Alpha's mate. And more than that, I have the authority of having survived what would have killed most wolves. 9 years of bond rejection, while still contributing more to this pack than you ever have. So, yes, I dare to speak, and I'll keep speaking. Get used to it. The room went silent. Every wolf staring at Lyra with a mixture of shock, and in some cases, respect. She just publicly challenged a senior alpha, and done it with such confidence, such strength, that even those who disagreed with her couldn't deny her courage. Cale felt something shift in his chest, felt pride and awe and something deeper, something that terrified and exhilarated him at the same time. If you're loving Lyra's strength and want to see how this confrontation unfolds, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell. Leave a comment telling me which character you're rooting for, and give this video a like if you believe in second chances and redemption. Now, let's see what happens next, in this intense moment. Garrett wasn't done. He turned to Cale, his voice dripping with challenge. So this is your choice, Supreme Alpha? To let an Omega speak for you? To hide behind her skirts while she insults your pack members? Where's the strong leader we've followed for years? Cale stepped forward, his alpha power rolling off him in waves that made every wolf in the room take an involuntary step back. Let me be very clear, Garrett. Lyra doesn't speak for me. She speaks for herself, as is her right as a member of this pack and as my mate. And she's not insulting you. She's telling you truths you don't want to hear. My father's rule wasn't strong. It was tyrannical. He ruled through fear and violence, and it got him killed by his own beta. I continued his legacy because I didn't know any better, because I was too damaged by his abuse to see another way. But I see it now. Strength isn't making others fear you. It's protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's admitting when you're wrong and having the courage to change. And if you can't accept that, if you want to challenge me for leadership, then step forward right now, and we'll settle this the old way. The room held its breath. Garrett was a powerful alpha, older and more experienced in some ways, but everyone knew he couldn't match Cale in raw strength. Still, Cale half expected him to accept the challenge anyway, to let his pride and prejudice override his survival instinct. But after a long moment, Garrett lowered his eyes in submission, though his expression remained mutinous. I won't challenge you today, Supreme Alpha, but I won't support these reforms either. Many of us won't. You'll tear this pack apart with these changes. Cale nodded slowly. Maybe, but it's already broken, Garrett. It's been broken since my father built it on oppression and fear. I'm just finally willing to see it. And to those of you who feel the way Garrett does, I say this. Give the reforms a chance. Give Lyra and the other Omegas a chance to prove they're worth beyond the narrow roles you've assigned them. And if after a year, you still want to challenge my leadership, I'll step down. I'll submit to a vote of the pack and accept whatever you decide. But I'm betting that once you see what we can become, what we can build together, you won't want to go back. The assembly ended in tense silence, but Cale noticed that not everyone looked angry. Some of the younger wolves, and quite a few of the Omegas who'd never been allowed to attend pack assemblies before, looked hopeful. Lyra had insisted that all pack members be invited tonight, not just the alphas and betas, and seeing the Omegas' faces now, seeing their hope and gratitude, Cale understood why she'd pushed for it. They'd been invisible for so long, and just being seen, being allowed to witness their leader's commitment to change, meant everything to them. As the crowd dispersed, Lyra swayed slightly, and Kyle immediately caught her, steadying her against him. That was incredibly brave, he said quietly, and incredibly foolish. You're still so weak. You shouldn't have pushed yourself like that. She looked up at him with a tired smile. I had to. If I want to be your equal, I have to act like it. Can't expect respect if I hide in the shadows. Now take me back to our rooms. We have a bond to complete tomorrow, and I need to rest. That night, Cale lay awake in the chair beside Lyra's bed, watching her sleep. Tomorrow they would complete the bond, and everything would change. He would feel everything she'd felt for 9 years, experience her pain and rejection through their connection, and he was terrified of what that would do to him. But he was also terrified of what would happen if they didn't complete it, if he lost her just when he was starting to understand what he'd been missing. Somewhere around midnight, Lyra woke and found him watching her. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I'm scared," he admitted, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "I'm scared of hurting you more during the claiming. I'm scared of what I'll feel when the bond opens fully. I'm scared I'll fail you again." She was quiet for a moment, then patted the bed beside her. "Come here." He hesitated, then moved to sit on the edge of the bed. She took his hand, her fingers small and delicate in his much larger ones. "Fear is good," she said. "It means you understand the weight of what we're doing. But Cale, you need to understand something. I'm scared too. I'm terrified of letting you in after 9 years of keeping you out to protect myself. I'm terrified that even with the bond complete, you'll still see me as lesser. But I'm choosing to be brave anyway. And so should you." The next day arrived too quickly. The bonding ceremony would be private, just them and a witness as per pack law. Marcus would serve as witness, and the pack healer would be on standby in case anything went wrong. Lyra was quiet as she prepared, bathing in water infused with herbs meant to strengthen her for what was to come, dressing in the traditional white gown of a Luna, accepting her mate. When she emerged from the bathing room, Cale's breath caught. She was beautiful. He'd always known she was objectively attractive, but he'd never let himself really see her before. Now, looking at her in that gown with her honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her golden eyes nervous but determined, he saw her fully for the first time and was struck by how incredible she was. Not just physically, but the strength radiating from her. The courage it took to stand here and give him this chance after everything he'd done. The bonding ritual was ancient, unchanged for thousands of years. They stood facing each other in the center of Cale's private chambers. Marcus watching from the doorway. Cale spoke the traditional words first. "I, Cale Ashford, Supreme Alpha of the Northern Territories, claim you, Lyra Moonstone, as my mate, my Luna, my equal in all things. I offer you my protection, my strength, my loyalty, and my heart, for as long as we both shall live." Then it was Lyra's turn, and he saw her hands trembling as she spoke. "I, Lyra Moonstone, accept your claim. I offer you my trust, my partnership, my healing, and my heart for as long as we both shall live." Then came the physical claiming, the bite that would mark her as his, and complete the bond permanently. Cale stepped closer, and Lyra tilted her head to the side, exposing the curve of her neck where his mark would go. He hesitated, his wolf desperate to complete this, but his human side still afraid. Then Lyra whispered, "Do it, Cale. Claim me. Make this real." He struck quickly, his canines extending and sinking into the soft skin of her neck. She gasped at the sharp pain, but didn't pull away, and he felt the bond explode between them with the force of a supernova. Suddenly he could feel everything. Her current emotions, fear and hope and determination all tangled together. But underneath that, flooding through the now open bond, came 9 years of accumulated pain. He felt every moment she'd spent loving him from afar, while he looked through her like she didn't exist. Felt every law he'd passed that restricted Omega rights like a personal betrayal. Felt the physical agony of the incomplete bond slowly killing her, a constant ache that she'd endured every single day. Felt her loneliness, her despair, her desperate attempts to find purpose and meaning in a life where her own mate rejected her. It crashed over him in waves, overwhelming and devastating, and he staggered back from her, his hand pressed to his chest as if he could somehow stop the flood of anguish. Lyra caught him as he fell to his knees, her arms wrapping around him even though she was the one who was supposed to need support. He was sobbing, actually sobbing, something he hadn't done since he was a child. Great wrenching sounds torn from his chest as 9 years of her pain became his own. "I'm sorry," He choked out, the words completely inadequate, but all he had. I'm so sorry, Lyra. I didn't know. I didn't let myself know. How did you survive this? How did you not break? She held him tighter, and through the bond he felt her complex emotions. Yes, there was pain. There was anger. There was grief for the years they'd lost. But there was also relief that he finally understood. And beneath everything else, a fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from these ashes. You survived by being strong in ways I never understood, she said softly. And now you know. Now you feel it. So the question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? It took him nearly an hour to regain control of himself, to process even a fraction of what he'd felt through the bond. When he finally looked up at Lyra, he saw that she looked different. The deathly pallor was already fading from her skin, color returning to her cheeks. Her breathing was easier, steadier. The bond, completion, was already healing her, her body responding to the connection it had been starving for. But he also saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the toll that sharing 9 years of suppressed pain had taken on her. Marcus had quietly left at some point, giving them privacy, and they were alone in the chamber with the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Cale stood slowly, helping Lyra to her feet, and guided her to the bed. Rest, he said, his voice rough from crying. You need to let your body heal. She nodded, too tired to argue, and let him help her out of the ceremonial gown and into something comfortable. As she settled into the bed, he started to move away, but her hand shot out and caught his wrist. Stay, she said quietly. Please, just stay with me. He climbed into the bed beside her, careful not to crowd her, but she immediately moved closer, tucking herself against his side. It was the first time they'd ever been this close, this intimate, and through the bond he could feel that she needed the contact, needed the reassurance that he was really here, really committed to this. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if she might break, and felt her gradually relax against him. They lay like that for a long time, not speaking, just adjusting to the strange new reality of the completed bond. He could feel her emotions now, all of them, just as she could feel his. There was nowhere to hide, no way to pretend or deceive. It was terrifying and liberating. At the same time, as Lyra drifted towards sleep, she murmured, "This doesn't mean I forgive you yet. The bond is complete, because I chose to live, chose to fight, but you still have to earn my forgiveness, earn my trust, earn the right to truly be my mate in more than just name." He pressed a kiss to her hair, the gesture feeling both natural and strange. "I know," he said softly, "and I will. However long it takes, whatever I have to do, I will." Over the next few weeks, Lyra's health improved. The completed bond was healing her body, restoring the strength that 9 years of rejection had stolen. But the emotional healing was slower, more complicated. They were learning to live with the bond, with the constant awareness of each other's emotions and thoughts. It was overwhelming at first, intrusive, like having no privacy even in your own head. But gradually they learned to create boundaries within the bond, to shield certain thoughts while still maintaining the connection. And through it all, they were learning about each other, really learning, not just coexisting. Cale discovered that Lyra had a wicked sense of humor, that she'd never felt safe showing him before, that she loved thunderstorms and would sit by the window watching them for hours, that she'd taught herself 5 languages during her time in his territory, just to have something to focus on besides her pain, that she had dreams of creating a school for Omega children, giving them education and opportunities they were currently denied. Lyra discovered that beneath Cale's cold exterior was a man who'd never learned how to process emotions in healthy ways, who'd been taught that feelings were weakness and beaten every time he showed them. She felt his nightmares through the bond, saw flashes of his childhood, his father's brutality, his mother's murder that he'd witnessed and been powerless to stop. She understood, though she didn't excuse, how he'd become the man he was, and she saw his genuine attempts to change, to be better. Even when it was difficult and uncomfortable, he started attending council meetings with her, letting her have equal voice in pack decisions. When older pack members challenged her right to speak, he backed her up firmly, but let her fight her own battles when she wanted to. He began the process of reforming the Omega laws, starting with education and property rights, and faced the backlash without backing down. But there were setbacks too. Old habits died hard, and sometimes Cale would slip back into his old authoritarian ways, making decisions without consulting her, dismissing Omega concerns reflexively. Each time it happened, Lyra called him on it through the bond, let him feel her disappointment and frustration, and he would have to face what he'd done and correct it. It was exhausting for both of them, this constant work of unlearning and relearning. But they kept at it, and slowly, very slowly, things began to change, not just between them, but in the pack as well. The younger wolves especially responded to Lyra's leadership, to her compassion combined with strength. She started the Omega school she'd dreamed of, taught classes herself when no one else would. She created healing circles where pack members could process trauma and pain instead of suppressing it the way they'd been taught. She challenged every unjust tradition with logical arguments and persistent determination. 4 months after the bond completion, they faced their biggest challenge yet. A coalition of conservative alphas from neighboring territories demanded a meeting with Cale, threatening to sever their alliances if he continued with his reforms. They saw his changes as a threat to their own power structures, feared that their Omegas would start demanding similar rights. The meeting was tense, held in the formal conference room with representatives from 6 different territories. The lead alpha, a brutal man named Silas, laid out his ultimatum. Stop the reforms, put the Omega back in her place, or lose all your allies and face potential war. We won't let your weakness spread to our territories. Cale felt rage burn through him at hearing Lyra referred to as just the Omega, but he kept his voice level. Luna Lyra is my equal partner, and the reforms stay. If you want to sever our alliance over that, that's your choice. But understand that you're not just threatening me. You're threatening every Omega in your own territories who's watching, to see if change is possible. Silas sneered. Omegas don't matter. They exist to serve, nothing more. Cale was about to respond when Lyra, who'd been sitting silently beside him, stood up. Her voice was calm but carried to every corner of the room. You're wrong, Alpha Silas. Omegas matter tremendously. We're the healers, the teachers, the community builders. We're the ones who actually hold packs together while you alphas are busy posturing and fighting. And you're terrified of us. Terrified of what would happen if we were given the same opportunities, the same voice you have. Because deep down, you know we'd do a better job. You know your power is built on oppression, not merit. Silas surged to his feet, his alpha power rolling out threateningly. How dare you speak to me that way? I should challenge your mate right now for allowing such disrespect. Lyra smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. You're welcome to try, but I should warn you, Cale isn't the same alpha he was 6 months ago. He's stronger now, not weaker, because he's not wasting energy suppressing half his pack. He has the loyalty of every Omega, every wolf who was marginalized under the old system. Can you say the same? Or do your pack members follow you out of fear rather than respect? The question hung in the air, and Cale watched several of the other alphas shift uncomfortably. Lyra had struck at the heart of their insecurity. They ruled through intimidation, and they knew it. Cale stood beside her, his hand finding hers, presenting a united front. The alliances we have are important, he said, but not as important as doing what's right. I won't go back to being the alpha I was, the one my father raised me to be. That path led to nothing but pain and death. So if you want to sever ties, go ahead. But I think you'll find that the future belongs to packs that evolve, that treat all their members with dignity. The old ways are dying, and you can either change with the times or be left behind. The meeting ended without resolution, the conservative alphas leaving in anger, and Cale knew this would have consequences. War was a real possibility now. But looking at Lyra, seeing her pride and determination, feeling through the bond her absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. He found he didn't regret it. That night, as they prepared for bed, Lyra was quiet. Cale could feel her worry through the bond, her fear that she'd made things worse by speaking up. He pulled her close, tucking her against his chest. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Everything you said was true, and they needed to hear it." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure? I might have just started a war." He cupped her face gently. "If there's going to be war, it's not your fault. It's the fault of every alpha who's too stubborn and scared to change, too invested in a system that hurts people. And if it comes to that, we'll face it together. I'm not letting anything happen to you, Lyra. Not now that I finally understand what I have." She was quiet for a moment, then said something that made his heart skip. "I think I'm starting to forgive you. Not completely. Not yet. But I see how hard you're trying. How much you've changed. And I can feel through the bond that it's real. That you're not just going through the motions. So maybe, eventually, we can be more than just mates who are making the best of a bad situation. Maybe we can actually be partners who chose each other." Her words meant more to him than she could know. He'd been waiting for some sign that she might eventually see him as more than just the man who'd hurt her. Might eventually open her heart to him the way he was discovering his heart had already opened to her. Because somewhere in the last 4 months, he'd fallen in love with her. With her strength and compassion, her sharp wit and unwavering principles, her ability to be kind even to those who'd hurt her without letting them take advantage of that kindness. He loved her, and the realization was both wonderful and terrifying. "I choose you," he said quietly. "I know I didn't before. I know I rejected what we could be out of fear and prejudice. But I'm choosing you now, Lyra. Every day with everything I am, I choose you." She smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and kissed him softly. "Then let's see where this choice takes us." The war they'd feared came 2 months later. Silas had convinced 3 other conservative territories to join him in what he called a righteous campaign to restore traditional order. They attacked at dawn, a coordinated assault on Cale's borders from 3 sides. But Cale had prepared. He'd known this was coming, had spent the last 2 months not just strengthening his defenses, but also reaching out to progressive alphas who'd been quietly watching his reforms. When Silas's forces attacked, they found themselves facing not just Cale's pack, but also reinforcements from 5 other territories who'd decided they wanted to be part of the change, not stuck in the past. The battle was brutal, lasting 3 days, but Kyle's forces held, and it was Lyra who turned the tide. On the 2nd day, when Kyle's warriors were exhausted and the enemy was pressing hard, she went to the field hospital where the wounded were being treated. She'd been working there non-stop, using her healing abilities to save as many lives as possible, but now she did something more. Drawing on the power of the completed mate bond, on the connection she had with Cale, and through him to every member of the pack. Lyra performed a mass healing that had only existed in legends. She poured her energy out in waves, touching every wounded warrior simultaneously, accelerating their healing, giving them the strength to return to battle. The effort nearly killed her, left her collapsed and barely breathing. But it worked. The warriors who'd been too injured to fight stood up, their wounds closing, their strength renewed, and they returned to the battlefield with renewed determination. Cale, feeling through the bond what Lyra had done and the toll it was taking on her, fought with a fury he'd never experienced before. He cut through enemy lines like a force of nature, his only thought to end this quickly so he could get back to her. When he finally faced Silas in single combat, the older alpha never stood a chance. Kyle's rage and fear for Lyra made him unstoppable, and within minutes Silas was dead, his throat torn out, his body left for the carrion birds. The enemy forces scattered after their leader fell, and Cale immediately raced back to the field hospital. He found Lyra unconscious, her skin cold, her heartbeat so faint he could barely detect it. The healers were frantically working on her, but nothing seemed to help. Cale pushed them aside and gathered her into his arms, pouring everything he had through the mate bond, trying to anchor her, pull her back. "Don't You dare leave me, he snarled, tears streaming down his face. Not now. Not after everything we've been through, everything we've built. You don't get to sacrifice yourself like this. I need you, Lyra. The pack needs you. So come back. Come back to me. For long, terrible minutes. Nothing happened. Then, slowly, he felt the faintest response through the bond. A flicker of consciousness, a whisper of her presence. He held on to it desperately, kept pouring his strength into her, and gradually her heartbeat strengthened, her breathing deepened. When her eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she said was, "Did we win?" He laughed, the sound half sob, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Yes, we won. But don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever risk yourself like that." She managed a weak smile. "Had to. Couldn't let our people die when I could save them. That's what Aluna does." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that her life was worth more than any battle. But he could feel, through the bond, that she'd made her choice fully aware of the cost. And she didn't regret it. So instead, he just held her, grateful beyond words that she'd survived, that they'd both survived. The war ended that day. The conservative territories sued for peace, agreed to non-interference treaties regarding Omega rights in exchange for Cale's agreement not to push reforms on their territories. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And more importantly, it sent a message to Omegas everywhere. That change was possible, that there were alphas willing to fight for their rights. In the months that followed, Kyle's territory flourished. The Omega School expanded, offering not just basic education, but also training in healing, languages, diplomacy, and other skills that had been denied to them before. Omegas began taking positions of real authority, serving on the council, leading initiatives, proving again and again that they were just as capable as any alpha. The pack's overall health and cohesion improved dramatically. Warriors fought better knowing their families were cared for. Children thrived with access to better education. Even the alphas who'd been skeptical of the changes began to see the benefits. And through it all, Kale and Lyra grew closer, their bond deepening from a desperate measure to save her life into a true partnership built on mutual respect and growing love. 1 year after the bond completion, they held a proper mating ceremony, this time not out of necessity, but out of choice. In front of the entire pack, Kyle renewed his vows to Lyra. But this time the words were different. "I, Kale Ashford, choose you, Lyra Moonstone. Not because fate decreed it, but because you're the strongest, wisest, most compassionate person I've ever known. You've made me better, challenged me to be more than my father's son, more than my worst instincts. You saved me from becoming a monster, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." Lyra's vows were equally heartfelt. "I, Lyra Moonstone, choose you, Kale Ashford, because you had the courage to change, to face your darkest parts and grow beyond them. You weren't perfect, and you made mistakes that hurt me deeply, but you owned them and worked to be better. You gave me equality when you could have kept me oppressed. You gave me voice when you could have demanded silence. You chose growth over comfort, justice over tradition, and love over fear. And that's the man I choose to spend my life with." The celebration lasted 3 days. Wolves from allied territories coming to witness the reformed pack, to see what was possible when Omegas were treated as equals. And as Kale danced with Lyra under the full moon, feeling her joy and love through their bond, feeling his own answering emotions, he thought about how close he'd come to losing all of this. If she'd died in those woods, if she'd given up completely, he would have spent the rest of his life as an empty shell, never knowing what he'd destroyed. But she'd been strong enough to survive his cruelty, brave enough to give him a second chance, and wise enough to push him to be better. She'd saved him in every way a person could be saved, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted it, making sure she knew every single day how precious she was, how much he loved her, how grateful he was that she'd chosen to live, chosen to fight, chosen him. 3 years after the bond completion, Lyra gave birth to their first child, a daughter with Cale's dark hair and Lyra's golden eyes. They named her Elena, after Cale's mother, the Omega who died trying to protect others from oppression. Holding his daughter in his arms, feeling through the bond Lyra's exhausted joy, Cale made a silent promise to them both. Elena would grow up in a world where being an Omega wasn't a limitation, where she could be anything she wanted, where her worth wasn't determined by her designation at birth. She would know her grandmother's story, would understand the price that had been paid for the freedom she enjoyed, and she would never, ever be made to feel lesser than anyone because of who she was. Lyra reached up and took his hand, squeezed it gently. "She'll change the world," she said softly, "just like her father did." Cale shook his head. "No," he said quietly, "like her mother did. I just finally got out of the way and let the real Alpha lead." Epilogue. 5 years after the bond completion, the Northern Territories had become a model for progressive pack leadership. Omegas held positions at every level of government and society. The school Lyra had founded had expanded to 3 campuses, educating hundreds of Omega children. Laws protecting Omega rights had been codified and strengthened, and the changes had spread beyond Cale's territory. 7 other territories had adopted similar reforms, creating a coalition of progressive packs that were thriving while the conservative territories struggled with internal unrest as their Omegas demanded the same rights they saw elsewhere. Cale and Lyra had become unlikely symbols of change. Their story told and retold is proof that even the most damaged people could heal. Even the most unjust systems could be reformed. Even the most broken bonds could be mended if both people were willing to do the work. They stood together on the balcony of the estate, watching Elena play in the garden below with the children of pack members. No separation between Alpha, Beta, and Omega kids, all of them equal. Lyra leaned into Cale's side, and he wrapped his arm around her, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly she fit against him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Regret what? Completing the bond? Changing everything?" She shook her head. "No. Do you ever regret that I didn't just let you die quietly in those woods? That I pushed you to give me another chance instead of accepting your choice to leave?" She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes I regret how much it hurt, how hard the journey was. But I never regret where we ended up. You became the man I always knew you could be, and together we built something worth the pain. So no, I don't regret it." "Do you regret learning what real strength looks like?" He pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her temple. "My only regret is the 9 years I wasted, the time we lost because I was too damaged and stubborn to see what was right in front of me. But I'm grateful for every day since. For you, for Elena, for the pack we've built together, for the man you helped me become." She smiled up at him. And even after 5 years, that smile still made his heart skip. "Then we're even," she said. "Because you helped me become who I was meant to be too. Not despite being an Omega, but because of it. You taught me that my compassion isn't weakness, my healing isn't submission, my ability to build community isn't lesser than physical strength. We healed each other, Cale. And that's the real magic of the mate bond. Not just finding your other half, but becoming whole together." As the sun set over their territory, over the pack they'd reformed, and the future they'd secured for their daughter, Cale held his mate close and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that she'd survived his rejection long enough for him to change. Gratitude that she'd been brave enough to give him a second chance. Gratitude that love, real love, had turned out to be stronger than hate. That growth had proven more powerful than tradition. That together they'd created something beautiful from the ashes of his cruelty and her pain. He'd spent 9 years refusing to touch his own mate, refusing to acknowledge the gift fate had given him. But he would spend the rest of his life making up for it, cherishing her, honoring her, building the world she deserved. And that, he thought, was exactly how it should be. If you loved this story of redemption and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments about what moment touched you most, and let me know what kind of supernatural romance story you'd like to hear next. Thank you for joining me on Cale and Lyra's journey from rejection to true love.